Okay, so today things are more interesting. We're going to be building a tax manager with Node.js and its built-in modules. And believe me, you're going to enjoy it. We don't have much time, so let's say, so we just want to jump into this thing. The project, but we stopped halfway. But I'm going to start all over again so that we'll get to understand in depth what we're doing. Yes, and what we have here, we have project setup and structure, HTTP server creation. Then we add our JSON database. We go into routing, then request and response handling, CRUD and operations implementation. Then, if we still have time, we implement the MVC pattern, the module view controller pattern. It's a kind of a software design pattern, but we'll get to that. So we'll talk more about it. Okay. So, oops, what's happening? Sorry, please. It's like I'm messing things up here. Okay. So this is basically our folder. The tax manager folder is the one we'll be working in. And if you can remember the other time we checked out, we created a branch for documentation. So this is our branch. It's branch of, yes, we're still on this branch. It says docs add documentation. So I think before we start, we will check out another branch for this. I think let's just see, the branch name will be, it's a future, and we'll see task manager basically. Okay. Okay, so we're in the task manager branch right now. And let's begin. But before we begin, I would love to show you something. Let's say we want to log the directory name. So we say node index, yes. We are getting an error that diary name is not defined in ES module scope. So the diary name and the file name, you cannot access them in the ES module scope. As you can see as well, file name is not defined. Okay. So what we're going to do is, let's first of all set up our package.json file. So in building, let's say real world applications where you want to host in production, like you want to host your web applications, you have commands for testing and formatting and running all of those stuffs. But in our case, we're going to add two commands here, just for clarification, so that we get things going. We have the start command. And then the dev command. Let's see, we have the dev command. See the same thing, but I just want to show you something. Okay, let's assume the dev command, we're using nodemon, and then we'll say something like nodemon. But when we push this, Okay, so sorry about that. Let's assume we are using NodeMon in our development server, and in our production server, we're using just Node to start our application. So we just give two commands for development and for starting our application in production. So if you want to start our application, we simply say npm run start. And if you want to start it in development mode, you say npm run dev, something like that. So, but in this case, we're using Node, not NodeMon, so that every time we make changes, we manually stop and start our server. So this is it. And what else? Okay, I think this is all for the package.json file. Okay, let's come back to our index. Let's now import the modules we use. First of all, we import the HTTP module. HTTP module and then the FS module. And then the URL module. And what again do we need? Okay, I think when we start building our application, we know what we need. So let's set up our basic application. Now we want to create our server and then start adding features. So what we want to do, we want to create our server. Say const server is equal to HTTP, create server, then our callback function with request, response. Then we'll do nothing for now. Then let's see our port here. Const port is equal to 3000. You see server.listen port. They'll pass in the callback function that allows server is up and running on ports. Then our ports here. Okay, so let's start our server and see if it's working. npm run dev. Okay, it's working. But then we want to add, want to support different HTTP methods, and we want to route our application so that if someone wants to create a task or edit a task or even like delete a task, as you can see, we already have, our project is set up. We've created our server, the basic server, and then it's time to create our database. So in this case, we come over here, and in this source directory, we create a database folder. You see database, and inside this folder, we create a db.json file. And inside this db.json file, we have tasks of an empty array. Okay, now we have our database set up. Okay, so what next? We start routing our application, implementing our requests and our responses. Okay, but then before we begin, since the dire name and the file name are not supported in ES modules, we have to find a way to like mimic these behaviors. And one way we can do this is simply we get the current module URL. The module we're in now, this is the file we're in. We get the current URL. You see, const current module URL is equal to import.meta.url. So now let's log this to the console and see what we've got. We stop our server, we run it again, and see what we've got. This is pointing to our file, the index.js, but all we need is the path. We need to get this, the path to this folder, the source folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to see const current module path is equal to url dot file URL to path. We want to convert this file URL to path, not the file URL. We need the path, not the file URL. So we pass in the current module URL. Now, if we log the current module path now, let's see what we got. We stop our server, then we run it again. Okay, now we've converted the module URL to a path. Now we don't see the file / whatsoever. This is absolutely a path, not a URL anymore. But we want to get not the file path, but only this folder. We want to get it up to this source folder, not including the index.js. So we add another thing. We say the current directory. We want to get our directory, which is the source directory. I will say the current directory is equal to path dot directly name. Okay, we forgot to import the path. Import path from node path dot name. We want to get the directory name that is excluding the file. Then we pass in the current module path. Then we log the current directly to the console. Let's see what we got. Stop and start our server again. Okay, now we've gotten this up to the source folder, but not including the file. So we've successfully mimicked the name functionality. So what next are we going to do? Now that we've mimicked the name functionality, we want to get our database. Now, in getting our database, what the simple will point to the database directly and the file, the database file. So basically, what we're going to do is simply saying const database directly const database directly const db die is equal to first of all equal to path dot resolve, and we've got our current directory. They will the folder database, and then our database name dbjc. Okay, let's say const database, just like this. Then let's log our database to the console to see what we've got. Okay, stop and start our server. Okay, so we've gotten our database to our file. We have db.json here. Okay, let's stop our server and then proceed. So now it's time to start routing our application. Okay, so what is the first thing we want to do? The first thing we want to do is we have our function here. We want to extract or remove this function and make it a very separate function. We'll remove this here. And then we say function, see server handler. They'll pass in our request and our response. And in here, we just pass it as an argument to this create server function. So we have our request and response. But then this thing is deprecated, like path const L is equal to path dot is path dot sorry URL so let me log the URL and see. These modules can be confusing sometimes. Okay. Okay. It's a URL dot as a URL string. Okay. Basically, it is deprecated. So we want to emulate the URL the path string, and we want to use the URL and search. Is it the URL, the new URL, the inbuilt URL and object instead? So what we will do is URL, you have URL.pass. This is deprecated. Method takes a URL string, passes it and returns URL object whatsoever. But this has been deprecated. Can you see deprecated? Use the URL API instead. URL.pass has been deprecated, so we're not going to be using this. Instead, we will implement our own using the URL object, but it's also from the, what we will do now is this. We will say const. Well, first of all, we will get our method, and then URL, which we will rename to request URL, and then headers. This is equal to our request. We extract this from our request object. And now what we want to do is say const past URL is equal to new URL, and then the URL string, then our full base string, that's a full base URL string, which is say HTTP // please headers dot host. Now, if you log headers, to the console, let's see what we've got here. npm run dev. Okay, we've not made a request. And now let's try making a request so we can see what's going on. HTTP localhost 3000. What's it saying? Our server is running. What's happening? Okay. CDB for HTTP. So we've seen our headers here. We have host. The host is the localhost 3000. We have the user agent, which is called 7.8.7. Then accept anything from anywhere. So this is the reason why we're passing in headers.host, because the host is localhost 3000. So whatever host if we push to production, the host there will still be our domain, our hosted domain in production. So that is basically it. Instead of locally passing in localhost 3000, then going in production, then still passing our hosted domain, we just pass in headers host here. But then our URL here, our URL here will be the request URL. Sorry, not the string, request URL. Now let's try to log our request URL as well and see what we got. And then we'll log, okay, let's see our headers, the method, and request URL. Then let's see what we got. Let's send our request again. Okay, as you can see, the headers is an object, the method is get, and the request URL is just a /. That means everything, but we can still make this. We can make this URL, we can even pass something like task, something like this also. But we want to keep it simple for clarifications. We see how we can handle that, the tasks in handling request. So we've got our parsed URL. Now what we want to log to the console is our parsed URL. Parsed URL. Stop our server, and then we'll run it again. Then we'll make a request. Let me see. Look at our parsed URL. It's actually an object. We have the hypertext reference. We have the origin, which is the HTTP. We have the protocol, it's HTTP. We have the username, password, no username, no password. We have the host, localhost 3000. We have the host name, which is localhost. We have the port, which is 3000. Then we have the path name. The path name is /. Let's assume we made a request with this. We made a request with /tasks. And let's view what we've got here. Now you can see the path name is /tasks, not only /. Okay, so we are gradually understanding what's going on. The reason why we're getting all these things, so we can handle. We'll see in a minute why we need all these things, so we can handle our request successfully. Okay. So now in our function, we've done everything. And we just need to handle requests now. Okay. Okay, we're back, and I promise this time around, no distractions. I have some kind of distractions. Okay, we're back. Okay, so now we want to handle our request and whatever response we've got. We're going to be using an if. We're going to use if statements, no switch. If statements for clarity. So what we've got here, we say first thing first. Say if method is equal to get, then we want to handle the get request. Else, if method exactly what method again we're going to be handling post. Okay, so it will create before we can edit or delete. Okay, post, then we handle post requests, and another else if method exactly equal to put, we handle put request. Else, if method exactly equal to patch, then we handle patch request. We'll see in a minute why the patch is different from the put method. Else, if method exactly equal to delete, we want to handle the delete method. Method, not request, please. Patch method. These are HTTP method, not request. Patch method. And then post method. And get method. Okay. So else, if no method is matched, if the method the person specified in the request does not match any of these methods, what do we want to do? We want to simply else. We want to simply response that was okay. Let's response dot end. Let's leave it like this first. We'll handle this later. So this response dot send not found, just like this. But then we handle that. But you can see here that anytime we want to send back a response, we have to do something like response dot write head response. We have to do something like response write head 200, or if it's for creation 201, if it's not found 404, if it's server error 500, and so on. And then we pass in the content application, content type application JSON, and we don't want to do that. We don't really want to do that. So what we're going to be doing is we want to create a function that we handle this thing for us automatically. When we call this function, then we pass in some arguments, and then the function will handle all these things for us. So the function we're going to be creating is simply this. Okay, let's create the function up here. Let's say function send response. let's give it this name, send response. And then we'll pass in the parameter of response, status code, status code, and then our data, the data we want to send back. And then in this function, we'll say response, response, write head. Then we want to write the status code. And then, you know, in our application, we'll always be sending back JSON. We're not sending back any kind of data type, just JSON. So in this JSON, we specify our content type. Sorry, in this right head, we specify our content type, which is application JSON. Okay, now after this, we will return a response, and JSON stringify, because we are sending a JSON object. And then the first thing is our data, and then the second thing we pass in is null. Then the third thing is a number. Okay, so now we have to explain this JSON, because most of us say, why is JSON taking in too many arguments? Okay, so this is another thing to explain. I thought I had an index. Let me just create an index, and then we'll see. This is we have an object const. Object is equal to name. Let's say name is KodeCamp, and then age is 620, and then secret is some secret. Okay, this is supposed to be a string, some secret. Oh, what's happening here? KodeCamp, okay. Is this some secret here? And then we'll see result is equal to JSON dot stringify our object, and then a function that takes in a key and a value. Let's say key value, and then we'll say inside this function, if key is exactly equal to secret, return null, or return, or is it value? We simply return the value or the key. Okay, what we're returning is actually the value. Yes, if the key is exactly equal to secret, we don't want to return, we don't want to display our secret to people, so we return null, or we return every other value. Then in here, this is for indentation. We want to indent it by 2 spaces. We want to indent our object by 2 spaces in our JSON results to the console. And now what is happening here? We'll have to go back a bit to our index. Then we'll say node test. Is it index? Okay, index.js. Because we don't want to display our secret to users, as you can see. So we can even extract this function. Okay, let's say const jf, which is JSON function, is equal to Then we assign it our function. And then like this. And then we run our file again. As you can see, our result is correctly displayed. But this is rare because every to be visible to the users, you just handle it before even passing it to the stringify function. For clarity, I just want you to know this is for indentation. Let's make it 4 and then run our file again and see what happens. Can you see? Check the space here and the space here. This space here is more wider. From here to here is wider than here to here. And if you make it see, it is like that. And this space here is more wider than this and this. So we've understood what JSON, this stringify takes in 3 arguments. The object or array we want to stringify, or the anything we want to stringify, function that then performs some operation on this data we want to stringify, like hiding some data before stringifying it, and then the indentation is either a string or a number, and then that's basically just that. Okay, we've explained our JSON stringify. We're not going to be explaining our JSON parse because that one we already know is converting an object in JSON form to a JavaScript object, converting a JSON object to a JavaScript object, and stringify is converting an object. So that's basically it. So let's go back to CD, our task manager, task manager, and we're in now. Okay, task manager, we're in methods, and then we are done with our send response. So now, first of all, we use our set response in our found. We'll use it in the method not found so that we can see basically how to use the this send response function. So we see send, oops, okay, send response, and then the response we're going to be sending is a not found in our response from this response here, because this is the response we are using to send all this. We use this response to write our head and then send back a JSON JSON data to the user. So first of all, we pass in, where am I going to? Our response as our first argument. Then we pass in a 405 error code, which is method not found for 405. And then we pass in an object with a message saying method not allowed, not found. How can method not be found? It can be found but not allowed, because you already specified your method, so we found it, but we are not allowing it. Method not allowed. And so, okay. So now let's start our application and then let's see what we've got. Oops. npm run dev. Oh, good. Yes, application is running. And then we'll do something like this. But this time around, okay, let's see, a request, and then we pass in, let's say, fra as our method. And then with no data, then we see http://localhost 3000/tasks, or just 3000, and then we send it. Oops, I forgot this. Yeah, legal format passing missing URL price. This is not sent. Any mistake? Localhost. It's actually a mistake here. This will be a colon / localhost 3000. Why am I always making this mistake? Let's specify our prior again, and then our HTTP. Localhost 3000. We get to see this in a moment because I'm getting some errors here and I don't want to waste time debugging what is not supposed to be debugged. And for those of you who want to know about the core, this is client URL. Well, this is client URL, and it's basically used for making requests. It's short for client URL. It's a command line tool and library for making network requests in various protocols, but primarily we can use it for making HTTP requests. It's available on many Unix-like systems and Linux, the Mac OS, and the rest. So basically, the syntax for core is you simply call the and then URL. And you don't worry, because all we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using only core, no Postman, no other tool. We're going to be using only the command line for this. So you get accustomed to core so that you can use it if you wish to. We're going to be using this to post data, delete data, edit data. So don't worry, you get used to it. But for short, it is client URL for making methods like it has method like we have core O for output. Let's say you specify a file text.txt, then a URL that you want to download the content of that URL into this file, or a H for headers. You simply want to, you set custom headers. Then you see headers, then authorization, bearer, authorization / bearer token. You want to set custom headers, and then L, you can, L is for redirection, like for redirects. You want to redirect, you specify L, then your URL, and then at the end, you specify URL HTTP, so at the end is your redirection URL. And then if you want to authentication, you can do something like U/U, then your username, then your password, and then followed by your the URL for your authentication / and so on. We have a method like add for read only, and then X that we use. This is just for request. We got X. This is short. If you say call X, this is short for saying for double dash, then request, then your method, then the D, we want to send data. D is for data, which you can simply say double dash, then data, then you go on and specify your data. Either you do something like ID is equal to 1, and then username is equal to some gibberish, something like this. Or you send your data in a JSON format like this. You say like this, then you say ID is 1, and comma, username is a UN, which is username, is some string, some gibberish like this. And you can see we are sending it as a JSON format. If you don't want to use the first pattern, we just do something like this. Is it backward slash, then your URL, which you want to send the request. Then if you want to you want to edit a resource, you can send along with your ID after everything. You specify your ID at the end. But everything we'll be looking at, all these things, we'll be using it to without using Postman or any other tool. So this is just that. If you send in a wrong method, it will send back a response 4 or 5 with a message of a method not allowed. And this is sweet. So next, what are we going to do? We want to, before we start handling anything, we want two other helper functions. That a function that will help us to write to our database, and then a function that will help us to read from our database. So how are we going to get this done? Okay, basically, let's implement, first of all, implement a function that will help us read from our database function. Let's say read database. All we want, we are not passing any parameters to this function, but then we'll go ahead and say try, because we want to handle errors. So you see const database data is equal to fs.read file sync. We're reading it synchronously. Database path. Database, sorry, please. This is our database. This is our database path. Let's just make it a path. Then we see database path. And then our encoding is UTF-8. UTF-8, like this. Oh, double comma, it's just one. UTF-8. And then when we get our data back, what we want to return is return. We're getting our data in a JSON format, and it's a JSON object. So we want to convert it to a JavaScript object, JSON parse database data. Database data. This object, it will return this, we're reading our database part, and it will return the data from our database and pass it to this function. Then we'll convert this data to a JavaScript object so that we can modify it and save it back to our database. Okay, so now we've actually gotten our data, and then we return it. So we want to handle errors. But what if there's an error? We just throw an error, throw new error. And then error reading, you say error reading from database. And when we throw this error, any of these handlers that we're calling this function in will automatically handle these errors. As we go on, we'll see how we can handle errors here. Okay, then another method. Let's check another method that will help us write to our database. Write, is it write, read database, also write database. You just make this one write database. And then this write database, taking our data that we want to write to our database. And then basically what we want to do is we also handle errors here. Try. So what we want to do is fs write file sync. We're not doing it asynchronously, we're doing it synchronously. Then database path. We initially logged this database path on our console, and we saw that it directly led us to our JSON file, our database JSON file here. Okay, so we want to just write the data to this database, our database, and then first of all is the path or the file we want to write it in. Then the second is the data we want to write. So say JSON string file. The data we want to write, we want to convert our data back to a JSON object. And then the second is no, we don't want to perform any operations. Then the indentation is two spaces, not more than two. Okay. This is blocking me. Okay, it's good. And then after writing, if there's an error while trying to write our database, we handle these errors and then show them to the user, throw new error, see error writing to database. And this is sweet. Now we've got two functions, two helper functions that will help us. And then write and read from our database to make our work more easy, I think. So now let's process to handling our gets. So, but we want to get posts by, we want to get fetch all our posts. Sorry, post. This is not a blog, actually a task. We want to get fetch all our tasks by fetching all. We first of all handle fetching all our tasks, then fetching a single task by ID. So how possible is this going to be? So the first thing we're going to be doing here is we say, after say if the method is get, and then if the passed URL that path name, we logged the path name earlier and we saw what the path name was. Then we want to say if the path name is exactly equal to tasks. We want to handle fetching tasks, then we handle errors, a try catch block here, and then we see const data is equal to read database. And we know what the read database is doing. It will read our database and return the data in a JavaScript object form. Can you see? It will read our database and return the data. So we don't need to write all this logic. We just call the function and then we get our data back. So that is the usefulness of that function over there. And then we see read database. In this case, we've gotten our data back. So we want to send a response. We want to say send response of the first is our response from this function, this response here, this response argument. And then the second is 200. The request is being successfully processed, and then the data we want to send back. Can you see this? And then, but if there's an error, we want to send a response. We want to send a response of response object over there. Then 500. 500 means what? Internal server error with an object of message, internal server error also. Okay, so we've successfully handled fetching all our tasks. So let's come here and then stop our server and then run our server again. And then let's come here and make a request. But right now, let's first of all, we'll go back and add some tags in our database. This is actually an array. So this array we have first we have an object. Is it like this? An object, okay. JSON. Okay. An object of first of all, an object of ID 1. And then title of first task. And then let's copy, then the description. We also have a description of description of first task created, like this. Okay, so we have an object in an array, and this is JSON. Okay, let's see what we've got. We stop our server again, then run it. Then we come here and make a request to http://localhost 3000. Okay. Okay. Not there. Index, yes. What are we not handling? We're sending back our data get partner tags. Okay, we made a mistake here. We did not specify it's /tasks. Okay, and this is sweet. Can you see? We're getting our tags back with an array ID 1 tags, first tags, and it's working. It's working. Okay, this is sweet. This is sending back the response of, we're sending back our response, and this response here, we're using it in this, where is it? We're using it in this send response function to write head. This write will take the status code, and we passed in our status code here as 200, which is success. And then after passing our status code, we pass in our data, the data we actually want to send back. And then this right head, a content type is application JSON. So we're sending back a JSON data to our user. Then this response here will also, the response will also end with JSON stringify data node processing. So pass in null and then the indentation of 2. So if you specify 4 here, there will be a larger space here. Okay, that's just it for handling all our tasks. But if pass URL.path name is equal to tasks, then we want to handle simply fetching our tags, a single tag by ID. So how are we going about this thing? So the only way we can go about this is another else statement. Else if pass URL.path name starts with, I believe you know about the inbuilt and starts with method, or is it a method or a function? Start with the start string, the position, the returns true if the sequence of elements of start string convert to a string in the same as corresponding elements of the object. So they start with, if we want to say, if the string starts with this, the URL, you know, the URL is a string. So we want to say slash tags slash, you know, if you are sending a request and you want to send with an ID, you say slash the ID may be 1 or 2, like this. So if we want to check if it starts like this and then there's a / at the end, that means the person specified an ID. So we want to get that ID and then make some kind of processing or something like that. So if it starts like this, that's then what do we want to do? We want to say const task ID is equal to passed URL dot split. Sorry, passed URL dot path name. It's an object, not a string. Path name or split. So where do we want? We want to split like this. Okay, so now we want to understand very clearly. I know we're not beginners and this is an intermediate course, but then we will need to understand vividly what's going on. Split means this will split this into an array. You understand? The first here, we have the tag, it will split, we have, okay, let's just log task ID to the console and then stop our server and then run the server again and then make this request. Can you see? Can you see this? Because actually the path name is tags/2. So we're splitting it where we have /. So at the beginning, it's an empty string because there's nothing at the beginning before this /. While making our request, then we have our task, the second item in the array, then we specify an ID of 2. So this ID will come last. So the first item in our array is 0, that is offset 0, offset 1, and offset 2, also known as indices, index 1, index 0, index 1, and index 2. So what we want to get is, this is returning an array. And then you say, you can, if you want to access the first element in this array, you can say task ID of 0. But we don't want to do this. We just want to make things simpler. Since it is returning an array, then we can just say 2. That is the third element in the array, which is the ID. As you can clearly see, this ID is a string. It is a string. So let's process handling our single task. So now that we've had our ID, we'll go over implementing we'll handle errors first, try catch, block, and then we see const task. We'll first of all read our database. Yeah. Earlier we fetched our data, but then we want to destructure as you can see, we have tasks in here. So the data is returning with a task item in the data. So we want to destructure the tasks out of the data we are returning. Is equal to read database. What am I doing? Read database. And then what we want to do, we want to find the task with that very ID. So we say const task is equal to tasks dot find task dot find. Remember, task is an array. But before returning it, look at what I'm just making reference so that you understand very well what's going on. The read database, first of all, converting this to a JavaScript object. That's why we are just mapping it directly. It is first of all converting it to a JavaScript object. So we don't need to handle it here. It's already handled for us. So all we need to do here is then we first of all find the task by its ID. Then we say task. Then we say task.id is exactly equal to. But then the task we are getting, the user is sending in the task ID as a string. So we need to convert it to an integer. If not, it will not work. Integer and string are not comparable. To return not a number. So pass int of task ID. This task ID that we got from the user's request. We got from the request. So we've got our task. Now, let's log our task and see what we've got, either an object or an array. This is how to build your applications. You build bit by bit, and then you try to debug. Okay, so you don't make mistakes. So let's run npm run dev. And then we have our task. Now we're going to be making the request with an ID of 1 because we don't have 2 in our database. Okay. And what we're getting here is an object, and this is what we're supposed to get, an object and not an array. Can you see? So what we do here is we first of all check. This is blocking me. So first of all, check if do we have a task? If task, then if there's a task, this will evaluate to true, and if there's no task, it will evaluate to false. So we check if task, we send a response. With our response, first of all, passing our response. Or let's say what we need to handle first is if there's no task. Let's just handle if there's no task, it will evaluate to false. Then we send a 404, which is what? Not found. Not found. Yes. The reason why we're not talking about status codes is because you are not a beginner. Always remember that. And if I've made any mistake, you are free to correct me, because this status code sometimes can be confusing if you are actually working on the project. Okay. So a 404 and an object of a message no temporary trust, no task found with ID, then we see ID. Okay, then let's handle errors here properly. But if it's evaluated to true, then we send a response of 200. Our task, we found our task, and then we send the task. Here's our task. Send our task. Okay. And now let's handle errors. But what if an error occurred during the, now we've handled not finding a task, but we've not found the task. What, maybe a server or it's down or something like that. We don't know what happened. But then we need to handle the error to correctly display the error message to our users. Response, and then 500, and then message, internal server error, so that our user will know that yes, there's an error in our server, and then we need to maybe try again later or make another request or something like this. Okay, so now let's stop our server and then start it again. Come back here, make a request with an ID of 2. Can you see? Internal server error? No. Error not handled correctly. Try cards and error. Maybe. Is that really an internal server error? Let's see, internal server error. Okay, let me try this again with 1. /1. So what's happening? /1. Tax.find tax.id exactly equal to Python. Send response. Okay, we're still out like this. Okay, someone want to say something, I think. Someone raise his hand. Okay, so let's now start our server and make the request. Make our request. Okay, now run this. Okay, we're getting our first task. Then let's run it with an ID that's not in our. If task will be equal to no or okay. Let's try this again and see what we've got. Maybe I have not been handling this correctly. Okay. Still getting internal server error. It's not supposed to be so. Task return. What does the find function? Yeah, go ahead. Does the task function returns -1?
Okay, thank you. I think we should check what task return. It might be an empty array.
An empty object or an empty array. Okay, let's say if task like this, length. If it's an empty array, then this will work. Okay. Let's try this first, then we check what task is returned. Let's make our request. Okay. Log task. Then stop our error. Run it again. Then make a request with undefined. Okay. if task is exactly equal to undefined. A little kind of issue. Try to get you. Okay. Just move this thing here and stop wasting our time on this. Let's make it 1. But then, as you can see, we are not handling the let me see something here. This kind of thing can be frustrating. 2. Also get the internal server error. Task not found. Task not found. Okay. We'll come back to this because we need to handle this here if no task is found, because this error here is a kind of a different error altogether. So we've handled fetching just a single task. Now let's move over to creating a task. You know, the post here is simply for creating. Post request, when you post, you create things. That's what I see. So we handle the path. If past URL dot path name is exactly equal to task. Oh, don't get confused. Can you see here we handled the method is get. If method is equal to get and the path name is task, but here if method is post and the path name is task, this way it will handle this. The request will be handled here. But if the method is get, this is where the request will be handled. But if you send with an ID, this is where the request will be handled. So this is what Express does for us behind the scene, or other frameworks. This is what it does for they do for us behind the scene. So we need to learn how to handle all these things and how to deal with them before frameworks or something like that. Okay, so if the method is post and the path name is /task, let's say let new task string. Let's new task equal to an empty string. Then let's handle errors here as well. And then we see now we're going to be using the request object, meaning with data. Request on, we're listening to the data event. Remember what streams do? Streams, remember what they do? Okay, I'm not going to talk about that. You've got to remember it by yourself. Is equal to chunk. We are reading this data, from the request, we're writing it chunk by chunk, and then we are adding it to this. We read the first chunk, we add it to it. We read the second chunk, we add it to it. We read the third chunk, we add it to it till the data is finished. So when we finish reading this data, that is when we want to process it and then save it to database or send back a response. So we've done reading the data now. So we handle the end events. So request on end. Then we take a callback function. What does the callback function do? We fetch our data, let's say tasks. We will fetch our tasks from the database, go to read database, let's say data, because the task is inside of the data. Then we say reading our database, we want to, because our read function is have already converted this that JSON object to a JavaScript object. So what next? We want to add this tags to an array, to the array of our tags that we already have in our database. So we say const. Okay, we'll simply say data tasks push. Then we will convert it to. This is coming in as a string, a JavaScript, a JSON object. So we have to convert it to a JavaScript object before pushing it to our array. So we say JSON pass, what are we pushing in? Our new task. Is that right? Yes. Received all the data, then we've added it to our task. So all we need to do now is push it to our database. So after pushing it, we want to write it to our database. And this time around, what do we want to write to our database? Is the data. Now we fetched our data, we've converted it. We're doing it manually, so we have to handle everything manually. So we fetched our data, we've converted this read database function, converted it to a JavaScript object. Then the JavaScript object contains an array of tags. So we pushed this tags, we converted it to a JavaScript object because it's coming as a JSON object. We've added it to our tags here, and then we want to save it back to our database. We want to modify our database by we've added this new tags to our tags list, and then we want to save it back to our database. And then after saving it, they want to send a response of a response argument first, then a 201, which means created, and then an object of message saying task created successfully, like this. Okay, so if there's an error, we say, oh, let's just say send response, and then we see send a 500 error, then we see error creating task, and like this, and like this. Okay, I think we're done handling our post. Can you see how we are handling our methods correctly? But then we are leaving something behind. I just noticed that we are not handling. What if the path URL, the path name is not tasks? We get an error, then our server may crash or something like that. So we say else. Then we send a response. Oh, yes. Response 404 with a message of, let's see, not found. Oh, you see, just not found, like this. Yes. Inside the get, if the path name is this, we handle this. If the path name is this, sorry, if the path name starts with this, we handle this. But if the path name is another thing that we don't know, you see, or you see, should we say URL not found, something like this. Okay. Now in the post, we also have, we're using if the path name is this, and then we also say else if the path name is another thing else and something else, and they want to make a post request with something else that we don't know, we say a response with 404 message not found, something like this, so that our server will not crash and it will handle everything respectfully. Okay, so now all we got to do, let's test our our post route. Okay, so if you want to test our post route, we make our request with the post method, and then the post method here with the data of a JSON file, and ID will be a string, let's say 2, and then the title also a string of a second item, and then the description also a string or some and then we close this, then we say HTTP //3000/tasks. Let's not get a cably. Try to stick. Try to the ID has no closing. We'll give it something like this. And then we'll start our server because it is down. Okay. Then we successfully, as you can see, we've gotten a message that created successfully because it is working. And let's see. Wow. No, it is sweet. It is sweet. Can you see how we handle this? And our tax array is in tax, and we added a item description, some description. Can you see this? This is sweet. And then we can go ahead and add another one. We can go ahead and add some disk, some disk paper like this, and then we'll come here and then we'll make it third item. It's just third. We make it an ID of 3. Then we hit enter. That's created successfully, and immediately we can see it, some discrete paper. And then third item, okay. Third item, okay, that's nice. An ID of 3. This is sweet. Our post route, and as we can see, it's working perfectly. Okay, now let me close this. I'm always going to this file. Now we want to handle our put method. Okay, the difference between put and patch is put is in your database. If you are using put, you want to simply replace that resource. Let's say if you're using put on an object of a task, let's say a task object, we want to modify the ID, we want to modify the title, and we want to modify the description. We want to change it entirely to another item. But if you're using patch, you want to modify part of that resource. Let's say if you are using patch on, let's say if you're using patch on this, you just want to modify the title or the description, or both title and description, but the ID will be intact. But if you're using put, you are just removing this and replacing it with another object entirely with a different title, ID, and description. So use put with caution. In fact, in real world applications, I don't use put because it's hard for you to say you want to replace a resource completely. How does that work? Replacing a resource is the same as creating another resource, but there are some cases where you want to replace a resource, and that's good. But then you use put with caution. Okay, in this case, let's handle our put method. Okay, so instead our put method, we are back again. So we are going to be doing the same thing that we did here. Because task ID, or let's copy this, because we're going to be handling the same path name and the task ID like that. Then we place it here, and then we close this like this. Okay. Now, if the path name starts with // that means there's an ID at the end, and that ID is an ID of a resource we want to modify. So how do we handle this? Okay. We say let's task equal to an empty string, and then we'll handle errors, try catch block, and inside of this try catch block we say request, because that is where the data that we use to replace the existing object is coming from. So we use it to the data event data, then the chunk that is coming from the data. Sorry, what am I doing? We passed to this callback function, and then we see updated task plus equal to chunk. We're just reading it and then adding it to our updated task. So when we finish reading this data, what else do on end? What do you want to do with the data? Okay. Data is equal to read database. We're actually fetching the data. And you know what? Let's actually destroy const is equal to data. Destruction is we're destructing it from this data. We are removing the array from the data object. So we want to also use tags directly. So, and task index is equal to task.find index. Talking about the find index. The find index simply finds in the given index of so we're not a beginner, you're supposed to know all this. If you don't know a task, this task will create a new array, then this task, you say .id is exactly equal. We are using passing because the ID is sent as a string, so we want to convert it to a. Then the task ID, and if the ID of this, the task is not -1, it means the index is not given. What this does is this task ID, if the ID of the task match, it will then return the index of that task in this array. But if no index matches, it will return -1. If task index, or what am I saying, is not equal to -1, because if no the given ID is found, it will return -1. Okay, so we say if task index is not -1, that means, so we say the array of tasks in that index, that task index, where that index is found. Let's say this thing returns, we found an index at index 0, and then it returns an index 0, then passes it to this variable element at index 0. Then we say the element at index 0, that's what we really want to modify our resource, is equal to JSON updated task. Can you see that we are completely replacing that index is found? We want to replace it with this object that is sent. Rise, we then modify our database with what? With our data. We've modified our data with this task at that index. We've changed it. We'll send it to this one that is being sent from the user. Then update our database. So we send a response, then 200, and then with message task successfully. Okay. That means if it does not return -1, this with a given index, so we want to modify it -1. This we evaluate to true. We want to send response, an object with a message. Let's say more descriptive task with give task ID like this. Don't find any task, we just send this back to response so that the user will know that the task, the ID you specified is not in our database, and maybe you should cross-check your ID and then send it again. And then we send response of response. 500 response, I think. Yes, 500 message. Error. Maybe something happened, our server is down, our server crashed or something like that, basically. What if there's no method, the method is not specified, and then we said send response. Response 404, that is not found, message, and then we say URL not found, just like that. Let's make it like this. Okay, so now it's time to test our put request. So let's run our server, and then we say slash. They want to modify the task with ID, the ID 1. Then we say description is this task is modified, and then we come down here, we say item. And then we can even change the ID. Okay, let's say we give it an ID of 3. And then here we change it to put, we don't want to create, we want to. Let's send it and see. Task updated successfully. And this is working, I believe. What have we got? Can you see? The task 1 is now with an ID of 3. Then with modified item, this what does it replaces the resource entirely. Okay, now let's send it again. But this time around, the first task, let's change the ID. We don't want 2 tasks with the same ID. We don't want to update 2 tasks at the same time. We're handling this manually, so we didn't handle that. Let's make this an ID of 4. Then hit enter again. Task with given ID 1 not found. Oh, can you see? Task with given ID and the ID is 1 not found. So initially there was a task with ID of 1. We changed it to ID of 3. And now we're sending ID of 1 and saying the task is not found. So let's send, if we change all these tasks, okay, let's see. Task updated successfully. Okay, the first item, find index. It found the first task with the index given. So when we send 3, it's returned index of 0. It found the first task with index of 0, then it modified only the first task, leaving the second one. That is sweet. That is sweet. Okay. So our put is now working. And we tested that task with given ID of 1 not found. It worked. Okay. So what are we handling now? The patch. This is where things get trickier. So this is frustrating. Or should I just go ahead with put and then leave the patch? No. You have to know how everything is working under the hood so as to gain control over your product. You are the owner of what you build. You are the owner of what you build. Take control of your product. Make sure you understand every bit so that debugging becomes simpler. So in this case, we're going to be doing the same thing like this. Updated task like this. Or should we copy everything here? Like this. Like this. And bring it down here so as to make it faster. Okay, I think we have another closing. What's up here? Okay. So, okay, another one. This is not it. Try a try patch. You know what? This is confusing me. Let me just copy small and do small. I don't need to copy everything at once. Just copy this one. And maybe instead of copying everything, let's go all over and do it from scratch again. But we'll know what's going on here. And let's handle this like this. Else, so that we don't forget, send response of response 4 with a message URL not found, something like this. Okay, we're good. So now we're going to be listening to the data event. It's a callback of a chunk with an argument. So inside this chunk, we'll update our, okay, first of all, we'll handle errors like this, try catch. Then we pass in this, then updated task plus equal to chunk. As you can see, we are like changing this variable. It was initially initialized to an empty string, and then now we're changing. That's the reason why we're using let and not const, because if you use const, it will throw an error. Okay, so at this point, we listen to the end event that takes in the callback. And this callback, what do we want to do? Okay, we want to read our database, and we want to do the same thing we did here. If task, because task index, read database, blah, blah, blah. So let's copy this so that we know that we're adding an, okay, do this thing like this, like this. Is correct? Yes. And then bring it down here. Like this. Pass int ID. Task updated successfully. But then we have more work to do down here. Error. Let's handle the error. And then send response 500. Object with a message, internal server error, like this. This is not what we're going to be doing. Well, first of all, remove task index is okay, remove that, then remove this one here. I think that's all we need to remove. Or in fact, let's leave this one, remove this one. If the task index, then we see updated task. This updated task here, we first of all convert it. Updated task is equal to JSON pass updated task. So we converted it to a JavaScript object. So there are two ways you can do this. You can say this is a const update task. Update task is equal to an object that you pass in this object. The tasks are that index. And then you spread, then you spread the incoming task. That is the updated task that you just converted to a JavaScript object like this. I know what this does. You are taking this object, and then in this object, you modify you did not change the ID. So those things that you modify will override the ones here. It's the same thing as saying, maybe you don't have, oh, let's leave that. We're not going to that. You should be able to understand this. Let's move over. Well, if you don't want to do this thing like this, you come over here. Oh, let's use it like this first. Then we'll use the second method. And then after modifying this, what you are basically doing here, you are changing the part of this data that have been modified by the user, maybe the title or the description. Then you come down here and then you say tasks. And then the task index, where the index is found, you want to change some properties of that object. Then you come here and you say update task. Update task. Not updated task, but this one, update task. And then you come down here, then you say write database task. Or is it task we're writing or data? Task? No, data. Because we want our database structure not to change. But if you write in data, we simply have an array in our JSON file, but not an object. Okay. So this is basically it. So let's go ahead and then test it out. You run there. Okay, clear terminal, go back. This time around, we have modified item, but then we say this is a patch requests in our task. Then we'll go back. We'll go back here. We change this to patch. And then we run internet server error. Okay. There's basically a mistake here. And the database task is go to internet server. The task in this go to -1 else send response 44. Okay, let's try to see what's happening. Where it's giving us an internet server error. Well, first of all, data, updated task chunk, yes. First US parts, task ID, to the task, data, tasks. Let's update task. Let's log our tasks to the console to see what we're getting. If at all. Okay. Now we have to come back and start afresh. We're actually going to comment everything here out. Like this. Then we'll log our task ID. Patch data for tasks D3. Task ID. Log our task ID is 3. We're getting a task ID of 3. Then let's log our updated task here. Nothing. Okay, it's not where we're supposed to log it. To return an empty string, we're actually supposed to log it after it has finished the end here. Okay. Comment this out. We'll log our updated task. Okay. And then channel server error. What is happening? Oh, request on. Request on. Request on. Okay. Request on. Okay, so now I believe our server will work as expected. PM run dev. Let's send it again. Task updated successfully. And which task are we updating actually? The ID of 4 title, then this is a patch request. Okay, let's see. Modify. Stack is modified. No, it did not. This is a patch request. ID 4. I was supposed to modify this, but it did not work. Okay. Oops. Okay, it's actually returning it. We logged it to the console. Let me remove it. Here, we actually did it, but then we did not save it to our database. This is a okay. And then we run it again. Task modified successfully. This is a patch request. Okay. Now let's remove this. Now we have 2 items in our database with ID. So we're going to change this to ID 4 and then send it. Okay, the ID 4 now, we'll see that we've not modified the title nor the ID. It's only the description. So that is basically how to handle patch requests. As you can see how the patch and the put, see how they are working. Okay, but if you don't want to do it this way, you can we discussed about objects, how to avoid immutability. How to avoid mutability and practice immutability. So in this case, that is what we are doing. And you can say something like const update task is equal to object assign an empty object. Then the object at that index we want to modify, at that task index we want to modify, we want to some properties that the user has modified and sent. We want to apply those changes to this very object. So those changes are coming in here. Updated task. No, object or assign does not support spread operator. So something like this, updated task. Okay, so now let's stop our server and then run the server again. And then change this to, I think we have an ID of 3, okay, 2. Task updated successfully. Okay, we have 4 now. Okay, now let's check the first one that has 4. And then let's change the description to something like object assign is awesome. Then send task updated successfully. Can you see the first one? Object assign is awesome. Okay, now let's change this to ID of 6. Then come down here and then change this ID to 6. And then we want to change the description to object assign is superb. Is superb. Then we send it. Object assign is superb with ID of we did not stop our server and the changes did not apply. Okay, now let's run it again. That's with giving ID 6 not found. Okay, let's change it to 6 like this and then run it again. Task updated successfully. Oops, I changed it to 6 and did not stop the server. Oops. And we have an ID of 6. Okay. okay, it will actually change, but the ID you see before because we're sending an ID of 4 here. So that's basically how the patch this thing works. If you don't want to use this, the spread operator, you just use the object assign. And we already discussed what object assign does. It will ask, copy this to an empty object, then copy the updated properties to this empty object, and then try to modify the object. Let's say it will copy the whole object here, then copy the description that is modified, and then replace the description in this object, this very object here. So basically, we're out of time, and that is how, and you can see our file is getting uglier and uglier. We already have, whoa, 166 lines of code, and that is not good. This looks, can you see how this is? So we're going to stop here for today, and then in our next class, we're going to implement the delete method, how to find a task by ID and delete. And then we're going to be also implementing our MVC. We complete our CRUD operations implementation, then we implement our MVC pattern. We move each file to where they belong. We create a model, a route, controllers, and then you choose MVC model view controller. But we don't have, in this case, in Express or in NodeJs, we don't have the view here. The view is simply where the user is controlling the application, but the controllers are simply, this here is supposed to be in our model. The write and the read database will be in our model, and then this send response will be in our UT function because it's actually a utility function. And then these are routes, these are controllers. We make a function that will handle the patch request. We make a different function that will handle the put request, and we make a separate one that will handle the post request, all the functions. And then we move this whole function, this server handler, we move it out of this file completely. So this file will be left with not less than, I think, not more than 10 lines of code. So that is what we're going to be doing in our next class. But for today, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask. Okay, any questions? Anyone? Anyone with any questions? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, we call it a day, and we meet on Thursday to continue with our task manager application. Thank you.